Some moments don't explode into public view. They collapse inward. They happen behind closed doors, in quiet rooms, when words land heavier than shouting ever could. This story begins in one of those moments, not with cameras flashing or headlines breaking, but with a conversation that reportedly left Meghan overwhelmed, because the truth revealed wasn't hostile, it was personal, and it came from the one person she trusted most, her mother. For years, Meghan Markle has spoken openly about resilience, reinvention, and self-creation. She built a public identity around strength, independence, and intentional distance from a painful past. Her story was one of survival, rising above fractured family dynamics, rewriting her future on her own terms. But the most destabilizing revelations don't come from enemies. They come from people who were there before the story began. According to those familiar with the situation, the emotional turning point wasn't an accusation or confrontation, it was a recollection, a memory shared quietly by Doria Ragland, something that had been carried privately for decades, never meant for public consumption. And once spoken aloud, it changed how Meghan reportedly saw herself. This wasn't about scandal, it wasn't about deception, it was about omission. The kind that grows heavier with time. Doria Ragland has always occupied a unique space in Meghan's life. Publicly composed, fiercely private, she rarely speaks and never speculates. When she does appear, it's measured, intentional, calm, which is why what followed carried weight. The conversation is said to have happened away from media attention, away from advisors, away from any audience. A mother and daughter revisiting the past, not to rewrite it, but to finally speak about something that had long been left unsaid. According to sources close to the family, Doria spoke about Meghan's early childhood years in a way she never had before. Not with drama, not with blame, but with clarity. She acknowledged that parts of Meghan's origin story, the version she grew up believing, were incomplete. Not false, incomplete. And incompleteness can be just as destabilizing as a lie. From the outside, Meghan's childhood narrative appeared straightforward. A biracial child navigating identity, raised primarily by a devoted father with a mother who was present emotionally but absent physically for long stretches of time. That absence was never fully explained. Until now. Doria reportedly spoke candidly about a period of instability during Meghan's earliest years, a time marked by personal upheaval, financial uncertainty, and difficult choices that were made quietly and never revisited. She described stepping away not as abandonment, but as survival, choices made under pressure, silences chosen to protect, and truths postponed because they felt too complicated to explain to a child. But children grow up, and what once felt protective can later feel disorienting. Meghan, according to those familiar with the conversation, was not angry, she was emotional. The kind of emotion that comes when pieces finally align, but the picture they form is heavier than expected. Tears not from shock alone, but from realization. Because the revelation reframed more than just her childhood, it reframed her sense of control over her own narrative. For years, Meghan believed she understood where she came from. She knew which parts of her life were painful, which were empowering, and which were better left behind. But this conversation suggested that some of her strongest convictions about independence, abandonment, and self-reliance were built on gaps she didn't know existed. And that realization cuts deep. Doria reportedly explained that silence wasn't about secrecy, it was about timing. She believed some truths would only make sense once Meghan was strong enough to hold them. But strength doesn't always soften impact. Sometimes it amplifies it. Meghan's public persona has long been rooted in authorship, telling her own story, reclaiming her voice, asserting control over how her life is understood. Discovering part of her foundation was shaped by withheld information challenged that sense of authorship. It wasn't betrayal, it was revision. And revision hurts because it forces you to revisit emotional conclusions you once thought were settled. Observers note that following this conversation, Meghan appeared visibly subdued in private appearances, not distressed in a public sense, but introspective, quieter, more inward. This wasn't grief over the past, it was grief over certainty. The certainty that she had already processed her childhood, the certainty that she had already done the work, the certainty that the hardest truths were behind her. Doria's revelation didn't rewrite history, but it added depth to it. It acknowledged fear, vulnerability, and decisions made without perfect outcomes. And for Meghan, who has built a life around intention and precision, that unpredictability was difficult to absorb. What made the moment even more powerful was that it wasn't framed as confession, it was framed as honesty. Doria didn't seek forgiveness, she offered context. She explained that some truths were easier to live with unspoken than explained poorly, that protecting a child sometimes means carrying weight alone. But weight carried alone doesn't disappear. It waits, and when it's finally shared, it shifts the emotional gravity of everything around it. This is where the tears mattered, not as spectacle, not as weakness, but as release. Because realizing that your story has chapters you never read, chapters written out of love, fear, or survival, forces you to confront a different version of yourself, one shaped not just by what happened, but by what you were never told. After the conversation, nothing outwardly dramatic changed. There were no statements, no interviews, no public acknowledgments. But privately, something had shifted. Meghan reportedly began re-examining moments she had long interpreted through a single lens: her mother's absence, her father's presence, her own drive for independence. Seen now through added context, those moments took on new meaning. Not softer, more complex. Doria's choice to speak wasn't about correcting public perception, it was about correcting emotional distance. She recognized that Meghan had reached a point in life where unanswered questions could no longer be left unresolved. And resolution doesn't always bring peace. Sometimes it brings understanding. Understanding that parents are not omniscient, that silence can be protective and damaging at the same time, that truth withheld out of love still has consequences. Meghan's tears were not about the past itself, but about reconciling who she became with what she didn't know. And that reconciliation is ongoing. Those close to her say the experience didn't fracture their relationship. If anything, it deepened it. But depth comes with weight, and weight takes time to carry. This wasn't a shocking family secret in the sensational sense. There were no scandals unearthed, no dramatic reversals. It was quieter than that. It was the kind of truth that changes how you understand yourself without changing what actually happened. And those truths are the hardest to integrate, because they don't demand outrage, they demand reflection. Meghan has spent much of her life stepping forward, toward opportunity, toward independence, toward reinvention. This moment required something different. It required looking back, not to assign blame, but to finally see the full picture. And sometimes seeing clearly is what finally allows the past to rest.